Reading 83 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Maurice Nicoll, Volume 2. Quaramid, Uglay, July 7th, 1945. On beginning to live more consciously. Each one of you is under the law of the pendulum. Each one of you feels good and then bad, feels happy and then feels dejected. Each one of you feels affection and liking, and then feels the opposite, disliking, and that curious opposite to affection for which there is no word. This is all mechanical life. This is all living mechanically. This is all living in the swing of the pendulum of life, and as long as you do this, what you gain will lose. And so you will always remain at the same level of being. At one moment you love, at the next moment you hate. At one moment you feel enthusiasm, the next moment you feel dejected. At one moment you think you are a fine person, and the next moment you feel you are not. This is the law of the pendulum, which swings to and fro. Somehow or other, we have to be no longer so much under this inevitable law of the pendulum, which causes the tides to advance and retire, which causes the winter to be followed by the summer by the winter, and which, in the case of your own heart, causes it to expand and contract. The law of the pendulum is very well illustrated by the action of the heart. The heart has two phases called diastole and systole. The diastole of the heart is when it is receiving blood. The systole of the heart is when it is contracting and driving the blood through the body. You can see, perhaps, how interesting this idea of the pendulum is as illustrated by the heart, because when the heart is passive and is receiving blood, it is on one side of the pendulum. It accepts what is coming into it, and then at a certain moment it changes its rhythm and becomes active and drives out what it has received. And this nourishes the whole body. Diastole is connected with the Greek verb meaning to put in order, to arrange, to make ready. This means that when the heart is not doing anything but receiving blood, it is, as it were, arranging, putting in order, making ready for this next phase called contraction or systole. Systole means in the Greek drawing together of what has been received and driving it forth, as in the contraction of the heart that drives into the body the blood that it has received. I have often thought that this is a very good way of thinking about the pendulum in a practical sense. We have sometimes moments of expansion and sometimes moments of contraction. We have moments in which things go right and moments in which things go wrong. The pendulum of our psychology, of our emotions, of our general feelings, swings to and fro. But when the pendulum swings back, this should be surely a phase in which things are put in order, in which one consults oneself, in which one gets things arranged rightly and made ready before one goes forward again. You cannot expect always to be just the same. Yet, how many people are disappointed when, having felt something, they find that for the time being they no longer feel it? Then, of course, they quarrel, feel bored, and so on. In other words, the negative swing of the pendulum for most people is simply a blank. But it should not be a blank. It should be a phase inhabited by consciousness and by a sense of the work in which one collects oneself together again and reflects, and does not necessarily think that everything is over, at an end. Now, if one can inhabit with consciousness both sides of the pendulum swing in every center, in every part of a center, one's life no longer becomes discontented, a mere function of the pendulum swinging. One learns to see things from 2 points of view. One learns to take oneself from 2 points of view, and especially one learns to take other people in the same way. Instead of being very disgusted or disappointed or bored, one begins to inhabit this uncivilized country in oneself, this barbarism, with more conscious thoughts, with memory, and then one returns on the swing, having prepared something, and once more re-enters into life without being depressed and without feeling hopeless. All this that I am speaking about tonight has to do with seeing both sides, the dark and the bright side, together through conscious memory, through work, and it is only through work that you can remember both sides of the pendulum, and so gradually pass psychologically into the middle part of the pendulum, where everything that we seek in this work lies. This corresponds to making full circle, to being able to go round the circle of life so that it is no longer a pendulum, but a circular motion, which is no longer governed by opposites. I have already told you that the motion of a pendulum is really a circular motion seen in 2 dimensions. Try to illustrate this for yourself practically. Now, when you go round the circle of all experience, you will begin to include the dark side of yourself in your consciousness, and you no longer see any contradictions such as the pendulum view of life gives. This means an increase of consciousness. This means seeing that summer and winter are not opposites but lie on a circle, a rhythm that is necessary. People who live very much in opposites, people who are always arguing whether this is right or that is right, as we see very obviously today, are in the illusion of the pendulum. I will quote you a very ancient saying about this. As long as you stand on a basis of rigid right and wrong, you cannot make this psychological circle in yourself, as for example in the Enneagram, about which we have not spoken much recently. The quotation is from the writings of Zhuangzi. He says, "All subjects may be looked at from 2 points of view, from that and from this. But that view involves both a right and a wrong, and this view involves also a right and a wrong. Are there indeed, or are there not, the 2 views, that and this? They have not found their point of correspondency, which is called the pivot of the Tao. As soon as one finds this pivot, he stands in the center of the ring of thought, where he can respond without end to the changing views, without end to those affirming, and without end to those denying. Therefore I said, there is nothing like the proper light of the mind." This thing called the Tao is really the work. It is a reconciliation of opposites in yourself, and the reaching of a new place in which the opposites do not control you. It is called the Tao in ancient Chinese esotericism. It is a way. Tao means a way, or a harmonizing way. For example, at one moment you think you are good, and at the next moment you think you are bad. And if you observe yourself critically, you will always be in this dilemma, in this double feeling. Now I quote from a later writing on the same subject, according to Plato's report. Socrates tells his pupils that he once went to see a wise woman, the prophetess Diotima, and asked her about love. He said to her that love was a great deity and beautiful, but Diotima replied that he was neither beautiful nor good. "What then is love, ugly and evil?" he objected. But Diotima answered, "Do you think that everything which is not beautiful must of necessity be ugly?" "Certainly," said Socrates. You will see here that Socrates was thinking on the opposites. That is, he was thinking in the ordinary way in which we all think that if a thing is not beautiful, it must be ugly, and if a thing is not good, it must be bad. The conversation continues. Diotima asks Socrates, "Do you think everything that is not wise is ignorant? Do you not perceive that there is something between ignorance and wisdom?" "What is that?" said Socrates. "To have a right opinion or conjecture," was the answer. "A right opinion is something between understanding and ignorance." Socrates admitted the truth of this, and Diotima then continued, "Do not then say that what is not beautiful is of necessity deformed, nor what is not good is of necessity evil. Nor, since you have confessed that love is neither beautiful nor good, infer, therefore, that he is deformed or evil, but rather something intermediate. If we are on the pendulum, all thought and feeling lies in opposites. If a man does not agree with your political views, he is hateful to you. If a man does not like you, he dislikes you, and so on. This is the law of the pendulum, exemplified in all of us at our present state of being and knowledge. This is how the world of war and strife is carried on, namely by people disagreeing with each other according to the law of the pendulum. In this work, we must find some way of reconciling these opposites and not being on this pendulum swing at every moment, because you will all know by now that by being on the pendulum swing and taking up violent opposite standpoints, nothing can be reconciled, no harmony can be produced, and our own lives and the life of humanity will continue as always. I knock you down and then you knock me down. One side produces the other. One opposite with which you identify instantly causes other people to take up an opposite opinion. It seems to me so important that you all begin to realize this, and especially in regard to yourselves, because your own views of yourselves are on these opposites and are specially governed by false personality. You all do many things that you do not accept, that you do not include in your general sense of yourselves, and so you swing all the time and have no central point, no individuality. That is why the work teaches us to observe ourselves uncritically, because only by observing ourselves uncritically can we go round the whole circle of our being, of what we really are, and this will destroy false personality completely. It will destroy all fanciful ideas, all pride, all vanity in you. You will no longer be the same person as you imagined you were, because the imagination always lies. But as I said in a recent paper, this is impossible unless you are held by the strength of the work. I mean that this realization of both sides of the pendulum in you will not be possible to you unless you have a very strong sense that something is holding you and making you embrace these opposites and causing you to get an entirely new sense of what you are. Remember that your private life is quite different from your public life, and also notice that you are always one-sided in this respect, and do not include it in your own estimation of yourself. But the whole of you must be included in your estimation of yourself. The whole of you must be included in your consciousness of yourself, because unless consciousness expands into your total being, you have no real knowledge of yourself, and you will always be pretending, always influenced by one little eye at a time. But all eyes must be included in your feeling of yourself eventually, and then I am quite sure that false personality will dissolve away into something quite new, and in fact very wonderful. You know how the Pharisee in yourself pretends so much and gives you such a false sense of yourself. What a nuisance this Pharisee is in one. What a wonderful thing it is to begin to see him. What is the Pharisee in yourself? The work calls it false personality, where you think you are right, where you feel yourself better than others. The Pharisee in you is all your pretense, and the false personality is nothing but pretense. Why are our human relationships so difficult? O once said, "They are so difficult because two entirely invented people, two entirely pretense people, try to come together." And on another occasion he said that nothing in life was what it pretended to be. If you have some inner discernment, some sincerity, you will not be surprised at such a remark. You will know the truth of it already. And here I bring in once more the idea of what good householder is called in the work. He is a man who does what he has to do from duty in life. He does not believe in life, nor does he believe that it leads anywhere. Now, on the practical psychological side tonight, I wish to speak to you about objecting. There was a good question asked recently as to whether dislike and objecting are the same thing. But the work teaches that you must try to stop objecting. You may dislike a person, but it is not necessary for you to object to that person. I remember being made to clean out a 6-year-old pigsty, and certainly I did not like it. The stench was awful. I noticed one interesting thing, that provided that I did not object to my task, I did not feel inclined to vomit. I disliked the task, but did not object to it. I noticed then the difference between objecting and disliking. Now, many people object to everything. What is the result? Do they increase second force for themselves? That is, force of resistance? Will their lives become more easy or more difficult if they object to everything? Yes, if they object to everything, their lives will become more and more difficult. They object to tea, they object to coffee, to getting up, to people they know, to the state of the world. They object to the weather, the government, their parents, and so on. You will see at once that objecting is a form of internal considering, making inner accounts. People with enormous fantasies, people who live in dreams of beautiful people coming to them and telling them that they are princes and princesses, people who are filled with the Cinderella fantasies, people who imagine they should never be in the base circumstances that they are in, never have married the people they are married to, never live in the houses they are living in, or have the incomes that they have. All these inevitably discontented people are always objecting to everything. That is, they are always making inner accounts, and all internal accounts, all internal considering of this type causes them to blame everything and to feel continually unhappy. So much so that even if they marry different people or have bigger houses or greater incomes, they will always object by habit to the same things. From the work point of view, such people are quite useless unless they can examine themselves, observe themselves, and see that it is they who are to blame. Now let us take the question of objecting and the question of disliking. They are two different things. I did not like having to clean out the pigsty, but later on I noticed that if I did not object to it, I did not vomit. In working on objecting, and this is a very useful form of self-observation, you must all remember that you may dislike something or dislike a person, but what you have to do is to stop objecting. If you do a task that you do not like, but you stop objecting to it, you will gain force. But to say in a silly way that you like a task such as cleaning out a 6-year-old pigsty is ridiculous. If, however, you can stop your objecting to it, which is a purely psychological matter, you will find that the result is entirely different, and you will probably not be asked to do it again. So try to draw a distinction between objecting to a thing and disliking it. I may not like a person who comes into this work, but as far as I am concerned, objecting to this person is on a quite different scale. I am quite prepared to find from my own experience that I begin to like this person after a time, but if I start off by objecting to this person, I will never come into relationship with him or her. So I advise you to observe objecting as distinct from disliking, and not think any longer that they are the same thing. This is a very good subject for discussion and for self-observation. Remember finally that we are told not to like one another, but to stop dislike. If you are on a certain level, if you are more conscious than you are ordinarily, you will not object to a task, although you may dislike having to do it. But if your level drops, you will both object and dislike, and your objections will feed your dislike. But if you will stop objecting, you will find that your dislike will not be fed and will not increase. This is a result that is well worth reaching through self-observation and through work on yourself. It will enable you to pass through many difficult trials in this work, and it will also make your ordinary life much more simple. Always remember that if you object to other people and nourish these objections, you may be certain that these other people will object to you and nourish their objections. All this is to do with rendering personality more passive and weakening the false personality. We must all practice silence towards one another, inner silence, stopping inner talk in regard to objecting to one another. Then things will grow and develop in our branch of the work. What is the result? The result is that if we stop all this mechanical objecting, we begin to include other people in our lives. So we shall see that this last talk about practical psychology has to do with the first part of the paper. If you like and dislike, you are on the pendulum, and nothing can happen to you from the work point of view. Now, if you non-object, which is not making accounts and therefore non-identifying with people, you will begin to be much richer and wider and more sane in yourself, and after a time you will feel your disliking and liking change. But this will never happen if you object the whole time. And I mean by objecting in yourself, although you do not express it. In connection with all this, I got a very interesting report from one of you who met a woman who had undergone severe mental stress and had broken down. This woman said that she had met Lucifer in her visions, and that she knew him because he had such hopeless eyes. And then she said, "You know, sin is not smoking too much or drinking too much. It is something which grows big inside you and makes you think you are right." You know that in the East, people who have got a little beyond ordinary mental control are often regarded as sacred, beyond being under the hand of God. All that I can say is that these two remarks seem to touch very closely on what this work is speaking about. False personality cuts us off from everything and drives us straight into life. According to this woman, straight into hell, where Lucifer, with his hopeless eyes, rules.